This is Hope from the Hill, brought to you by the ministries of Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, serving its congregation and the community for over 120 years. Reverend Gerald D. Kisner is our pastor. We're located on the Hill at 801 8th Street in West Palm Beach, Florida, 33401. You may contact us at 561-832-8338 or visit us on the web at www.tmbc1893.org. Now, Hope from the Hill.
Good afternoon. I'm Natalie Moore, and welcome to TMBC Public Square, where we take Christ from behind church walls and into the community. Today, we will continue our series on housing and your rights as a tenant or a landlord or a homeowner. We're doing something different, however. Instead of one interview, Public Square will bring you two different guests interviewed by two different interviewers. First up will be guest interviewer Dr. Angela Shuttlesworth. Dr. Shuttlesworth's guest will be Attorney Maxine Cheesman of the law office of Maxine D. Cheesman, PA. Attorney Cheesman is also a candidate for Circuit Court Judge, Group 18. Dr. Shuttlesworth and Attorney Cheesman will discuss landlord rights and duties. Next up, I will interview Attorney Henry Quinn Johnson of the Albertelli Law Firm. Attorney Johnson is a candidate for Circuit Court Judge, Group 25. Attorney Johnson and I will discuss home ownership, its benefits, and how you can prepare to become a property owner. So let's start with Dr. Shuttlesworth and Attorney Cheesman, followed by my interview with Attorney Johnson.
God is my all and all.
Greetings and thanks for joining us again at Hope from the Hill Radio. I'm your host today, Dr. Angela Shuttlesworth, and today we are privileged to once again have Miss Maxine Cheesman here to talk to us for part 2 of a series related to housing. And we previously had a discussion on tenants' rights, so today she's going to talk to us about her experience and the things that she's witnessed as a part of the law office of Maxine D. Cheesman today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Shuttlesworth.
And if you would, for us, for our viewers, give us a little summary of what they may have missed in part 1, or a reminder for what they may have forgotten.
Yes, last time we talked about tenants' rights. The best thing to do, of course, is to take it to an attorney. And sometimes they can find a pro bono attorney. It shouldn't cost them anything. When you're doing subsidized housing, when you're going into subsidized housing, the leases are standard. And they can't really be changed unless they get permission from HUD. So, you get what you get with the subsidized leases, the subsidized housing, but they still need to understand what it is they're obligating themselves to.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. And so today we're going to switch a little bit and talk about the rights of the landlord. And so what are some 3 key things that landlords sometimes do not consider when they want to make sure that they are not putting themselves in a position to have a fair housing violation?
Okay, that's one of the fair housing violation is one of the things that the landlord can really run up afoul of. The fair housing violation says that you can't make too much restrictions on children. In other words, you can't have, you're not allowing kids by the pool or things like that. That's a violation. You can't have you can't limit the number of children. There's a bedroom, there's a 2 heartbeats almost to a bed, or a room, but there is basically the fair housing violation. The problems the landlords run into with fair housing violation is that they make restrictions that are not allowable under fair housing, like restricting the children from the pool area, having too many children in a bedroom, saying that, in a room, you can't have, 5 children or 3 children or whatever in a room. There are certain restrictions, there are certain criteria that are in the code for whichever area you're in. That's basically what you don't want to violate. However, you can't tell people that, if they have a 2-bedroom unit, that they can only have 1 child, or they can only have 2 children. And I actually had a case like that where the lady was pregnant. They were in a condo. She was pregnant. She had 1 kid, and then she was going to have twins. And they gave her an eviction notice because now it would be 3 children, and they had documents that said no more than 2 children. You can't do that. That's a violation of the fair housing. So we got a nice settlement on that.
All right now.
And they stopped doing it.
So that also just makes me think of how you define a bedroom. I've been told that it must have a closet and it has to have a window and all of those things. And sometimes with these limited spaces, people are oftentimes trying to say a closet that's of a certain size is considered a den or a bedroom.
Right. What the code actually refers to is the square footage.
Okay.
Right? So they're saying like 75 square feet for a person, that kind of stuff, or depending on where you are in the county.
And speak a little bit about how this is relative to your work at your law firm. Can you give us a little bit of expertise as far as how you have supported landlords and a few cases and things that our listeners can learn from?
A lot of my clients are landlords. And what I do is, they'll come to you and say, well, I want an eviction. I want to get rid of this person. They understand that the landlord itself is, they're frustrated sometimes because they have people in there who are not doing what they want them to do, and they get frustrated. The problem is that you can't just evict a person because you're frustrated. So my role is really to take that anger out and deal with, okay, let's look at the lease, see what the violation is, see what you need to do. Do you give them a notice to cure, or have they really done something that you can evict them for? So I kind of rein in the landlords because I insist that they are going to do it right, or I'm done with them.
Yes. And that's good to be clear, like, hey, I have to come from an ethical perspective and make sure that my position, even as I am standing for you and supporting you and trying to be a mediator, right? You have to do what's right as well. So I'm sure that there are opportunities where you have to give them some kind of plan or some kind of action to say, okay, within X amount of time, you have to do what's right. And this is what that's going to look like. Generally for your landlords, how easy is that?
Sometimes I've had to part ways because it's important. I mean, people in housing, we need housing.
Yes.
It's important. So my heart is really feeling for the tenants. I feel for the tenants and I understand their plight, but they also have to do the right thing. Both parties have to do the right thing. So when the tenants do wrong, make sure the landlord do right and they correct the situation. If the person needs to be evicted, then you go ahead and evict them, but you must follow the law and you must be reasonable. And I've actually parted ways with landlords because I couldn't get them to do the right thing.
That's very unfortunate. And as you said, this is just vital. Like, you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is the most basic to air and food is having shelter. And you think about the cost of housing in Palm Beach County particularly, and I've heard of the tiny homes, the little tiny condos
I love those.
that they were considering and the whole urban movement to that and how it's impacting families and their ability to access fair housing. Some of the things that people think are that the rules and responsibilities for a landlord are solely just to hand over the keys and to collect the rent, but we know that's not true. Can you speak to some of the actual things that are expected of a good landlord?
All landlords have to make the place habitable.
Okay, now what does that mean?
That means that they can't have holes in the ceilings, mold all over the place, not have the air conditioning working. Even the blinds they have to change if the blinds break. They are responsible for ensuring a safe environment. You know, they have to make sure that the house, that, you know, the toilets work, that the appliances work, things like that. The landlord also is responsible for making sure that they adhere to there are certain duties that are actually listed in a lease that the landlords have to do, you know, fixing repairs and things like that. They have their part. They have to adhere to the contract as well, which is the lease. So it's a contract for both parties. Both parties have duties, and the landlord especially must make sure that people can live in the house. Because if they can't live in the house, what the tenants will do is give them a notice to say that if you don't repair this in 7 days, then I'm going to withhold rent, and they would have a right to do that, but they must give it to them in writing.
What I also hear you saying is that they must have a clear process for how they adhere to issues like water, electricity, and those basic things beyond. Like, that's pretty good to hear about the blinds, because I think about privacy and those things that may not be things that people are considering when they think about responsibilities of them.
Yeah, they can't shut off the water or the electricity or anything. Usually that's in the tenant's name anyway. But, you know, sometimes in the days of old, if the tenant didn't do what the landlord wanted or the landlord thought they were supposed to do, they could lock them out. They can't do that anymore. They have to go through a legal process. So the landlord has to follow the process for an eviction.
And you think about what I think of as the appliances. Like, we just went through the horror of having a water heater burst. And I can just imagine what that would do to thankfully we had a 2-floor house, opposed to somebody who's, like, you know, in a ranch style facility. Like, you know, you would definitely need some efficient response from your landlord. And so it's like, where is that, you know, that the gray area of, I know the lease says that I may have 7 to 10 days to respond, but this is urgent.
Right.
And so how do you negotiate that? Can you negotiate that in the lease?
Yes, if it's not habitable. If you can't live in the property and you have to go somewhere, they're supposed to pay for it.
So hot water is a necessity.
I wouldn't say that. Not in Florida in this heat, you know. But
they're like, you are right.
Air conditioning is an absolute necessity.
Okay.
If there's mold, you can't live in there.
Okay.
The air conditioning, if your air conditioner is not working, they can give you fans or something. Mm-hmm. But if there's mold in there and you have to get out of the unit, they have to pay for wherever you stay.
Thank you. This has definitely been insightful. I'm sure our listeners are gaining some great insight. And I just have to say that I want to hear a little piece of how this relates to the circuit court, and particularly how you are positioned to use your experience as you are running for a circuit court judge of Group 18.
Well, just in terms of the real estate part of it, the Fair Housing Act is something that actually comes before a circuit court or in a federal court. You can bring it either under circuit or federal, depending on what you're going under the statute or the Fair Housing Act. So I have experience in that. I also have experience in environmental. My background is 27 years of background in environmental and scientific area. There's so much going on with the environment that I think I bring that expertise to the bench. So I think landlord and tenant is something that, you know, it's really outside of the circuit court, although the circuit court can do it, certain types of it. So I could use that experience, but most of that comes in in county court, the circuit court cases that I've done, the areas that I've worked in is family law, probate, employment, fair housing, foreclosure. Those are circuit court cases, so I've done all of those. And my scientific background, I think, gives me a unique perspective on the bench.
That definitely makes me feel at ease, as I would want someone who's at least been exposed, but it seems like you've actually had experience because you talked in depth in ways where I know people who are like, I don't remember what my civil law course in high school was and who do I contact? They know that now, and that is thanks to you being here with us today. Is there anything else that you can think of that, again, allows our listeners to be hopeful as it relates to speaking up for themselves and advocating for themselves as a landlord and even as a tenant, if you want to add that in too?
I think people need to, once they understand their lease, they should get educated. I mean, Legal Aid offers, and Florida Rural offers courses in landlord tenants. And they should really participate. They offer it for landlords, they offer it for tenants, and it's really very good. The more educated people are, the better they can help themselves and stand up for themselves, you know, and they're more likely when they understand the implications of losing housing.
Yes.
Because if you're in subsidized housing and you lose that, then you're not going to be able to recover that immediately. So that's a water that you really need to tread very carefully on. So you want to abide by the housing. And don't take it for granted, because I think that, you know, we all pay for housing. We all pay to help to have subsidized housing, and that's something that we should not take for granted, because it's needed. We need affordable housing, we need subsidized housing, and we really, honestly, you know, some people take advantage of it, and they shouldn't. And the landlord shouldn't take advantage of it either.
And I also say we need an economy to make sure people are getting paid what they need to, but that's another conversation.
That's right.
But you did give us two very good resources. You mentioned Legal Aid and Florida Rural Legal Services. What should they expect as far as like the classes that they offer and or setting up a conference call, or how does that work? They just contact them and say, hey, I have a new lease, I have a question, do you have answers? What does that look like?
Legal Aid, I know Legal Aid and both Legal Aid and Florida Rural Services are very, you know, they're there to help people who can't afford it. So you can call them. They have intake hours. They set up an appointment, and you can go in and you can talk to them. When they have the classes, they advertise them, you know, and they advertise them in the different apartment complexes and all over the place, but they do advertise them, and it's something that people need to really move ahead and take part of those classes, get involved in those classes, because they teach you a lot of stuff.
And it's free.
And it's totally free.
Thank you. We thank you so much for coming back once again, and I'm sure we'll find another topic to use your expertise. But hopefully the next time you'll be here, you will have won your race. And our listeners, again, just to be reminded, we hope that you all are getting out to vote on Tuesday, August 28th, 2018, or before, for early voting. And when you vote, we hope that you're going to say cheese and vote for Maxine Cheesman for Circuit Court Judge, Group 18. Thank you, and we hope that you have an amazing week, and always be reminded that there's hope as we come to you from Hope from the Hill.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Natalie Moore, and this is TMBC Public Square, where we take Christ from behind church walls and into the community. Today, we are pleased to have with us Henry Quinn Johnson, who's an attorney, and he's running for Circuit Court Judge here in Palm Beach County, Group 25. Attorney Johnson has served as a prosecutor in Palm Beach as well as Pinellas County, and also as Assistant Florida Attorney General. Welcome, Attorney Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're so glad that you came to visit with us and to speak to our listeners today, because we have been doing a series on real estate, but from various viewpoints. We had one talking about tenant landlord law, and we focused on the tenants one time, and then we focused on the property owners, landlords. But we haven't discussed with our listeners some of the importance of home ownership and some of the protections you may have when you own a home, and some of the consequences and situations you can get into while owning property. So I think that would be educational to some of our listeners, and I know with your background you can help us out. Now, when you said you served as a prosecutor in the Attorney General's office, what type of cases did you prosecute?
Well, as a prosecutor, initially, before I got to the Florida Attorney General's office, I had prosecuted in Pinellas County, and so I covered cases that were misdemeanors, cases that were like driving under suspensions or driving under influence, or any crimes that were less than a year. That's where you usually start out. Then I went on to felonies, and felonies included everything that were your more serious crimes that go from where you can get sentenced from greater than a year up to life. And so that, my experience has been I've prosecuted all types of different cases. But as I left the Florida State Attorney's office and then subsequently went to the Florida Attorney General's office, and I worked as a litigation attorney in the eminent domain division of the Florida Attorney General's office before I subsequently went to the statewide prosecutor's office, where we prosecuted multi-jurisdictional cases, which covered more than 2 or 3 counties.
Understood. So you have a wealth of experience as a litigator, which is very advantageous to your knowledge of how court systems work and some of the protections that our citizens may need to know about, especially when their property owners are dealing with the government, either when you're talking about eminent domain, when you're talking about foreclosure or that type of litigation. And I know when we were doing our discussion when I first met you, you have done a bit of practice in foreclosure, have you not? I
have, and I currently work in foreclosure cases now as part of the litigation department. When there was a surge of foreclosure cases in Florida, I mean, it's really kind of created a lot of new case law, because a lot of cases end up going to the Florida Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has actually taken an interest in those foreclosure cases because some of them have taken longer than it normally would, and so there's been a push to make sure that those cases move through the court system. And so one of the things that the Florida Supreme Court did through a lot of the case law is that they've made a lot of requirements when it came to actually filing those type foreclosure cases. There's also been a lot of increase in the filing fee for foreclosure cases, and so the plaintiff, usually the banks or the creditors, always been responsible for those filing fees. But what was happening is that once those cases got filed, there is a backlog of moving those cases because they all start getting set for trial, and so there was a need for litigation attorneys to be able to come and try those cases, and so that's when I became associated with Abertelli Law, and I started doing all of their contested foreclosure trials.
Understood.
Initially started in Broward, and now I cover all of Palm Beach and the 19th Circuit.
Yes.
But it's interesting because my interest has always been in property law, and before I went to law school, I studied urban planning at Florida State, and with urban planning, the emphasis has always been like affordable housing and growth management issues because of all the development in Florida. And so I actually wrote my master's paper on affordable housing, and so I remember back, I guess I graduated from Florida State in '94, and so at the time there was called the State Housing Initiative Partnership Program, the Sadowski Act, that was created to have more, home ownership, to increase home ownership.
Yes, yes.
And so they wanted the private sector and the public sectors to kind of combine to create those, a trust fund to be able to to help fund the affordable housing. And so, and it was interesting because when I did my, study on affordable housing, it was always thought that with affordable housing or just having home ownership, increase in home ownership, it was a way to build wealth and increase wealth, in the communities. Because usually if you had, the home ownership, people had more stake, in the community.
Yes.
And they were more likely to kind of take care of the properties and, be a part of the community. And so that's why, one of the reasons why home ownership was always important. And that would kind of really took my interest in property.
Well, that's interesting because that sort of mirrors my introduction and background into law and real estate law, because I too, my undergraduate degree was in public administration with a focus on urban planning, and starting out doing planning and then moving after law school into primary practice in law that related to property, real estate, wills and probate. That all seemed to dovetail from that initial interest and exposure in property and a appreciation of the value of property. So as we continue in discussing property, you were spot on in discussing how a lot of times the knowledge of the value of home ownership and the goal of attaining home ownership is often seen as a way to build wealth. But a lot of time when people aren't prepared for that responsibility, by no fault of their own, there are situations that can occur that they are not able or have difficulty holding on to that homestead, and they may not realize their protections. So as a listener today, if we were going to talk about one of the most important reasons to maybe aspire to home ownership, what would you say that would be for our listeners?
Well, I think that, with home ownership, the way things are now, we're kind of like on the tail end of a lot of the foreclosure surges. And what happened there was that you had a lot of development, and you had a lot of developers were, kind of doing the financing and then subsequently selling the mortgages. And so some people who weren't, prepared to own 2 or 3 properties or 2 or 3 homes, it was they were really in a way kind of taken advantage of. And so but most people, when you prepared for home ownership, and there were some programs that they kind of gave people, I guess, like pre-home ownership credit counseling. They kind of in addition to the credit counseling, they kind of prepared, because with the mortgage, you also had the taxes and insurance that people weren't always preparing for or really thought about. And so with the, all part of the homeownership education, all of that was included in there. And so it really gave people time to kind of think about it, to kind of prepare for it. Because what I learned, sometimes is that, your rent, usually goes up every time you renew your lease. the landlord always wanted to increase the rent, and so sometimes it was just as affordable to get a mortgage and keep the taxes and insurance down. But one thing that we always told people that always buy what you can afford.
Yes.
And once you bought what you could afford, then it was easier to kind of maintain it.
Right.
And so that's always important, because even like when you go buy a car, they want to sell you the most expensive car
with
on the
all
lot,
the bells and whistles.
with all the bells and whistles, and not really, because the more expensive the car got, the faster or the larger the car got, the higher the insurance was.
Yes.
The premiums were. So those are always things like that to keep in mind. But obviously, I think that home ownership is a great ideal, and sometimes depending where people are in their in their life, whether they're more settled or less settled. But it's a great opportunity once you have a family, or not have a family, but just to be able to kind of build that build that wealth in a way that, because the mortgage, and I think that's one of the interesting things is that when they did some of the tax changes, they were trying to take away or reduce the amount of mortgage interest you could claim on your taxes.
You're right.
And so that's, I think when they ended up passing the law, they protected, I think up to like $500,000. That was always a part of the interest about that. Properties valued at 500, I think, and below that they gave you credit for your mortgage interest.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I, and it's, when you kind of think about it, it's interesting because I remember in grad school when we talked about affordable housing, and, one of the stories that always came up was the movie Raisin in the Sun. And so I think that from that movie where it just kind of emphasized home ownership. And so it kind of, especially in the black community, because when they from the story itself, and you saw it where the mother kind of explained that her husband had worked his entire life to save up money, and then when they got the proceeds from the insurance after his death, the son had taken a portion of it and basically wanted to invest it, and basically got scammed and got swindled, but they were able to save a portion of it that they were able to make the down payment, and it made a big difference for their lives. And so, I mean, as old as that story is, it's still kind of relevant today, because it kind of talks about, making that first down payment is usually the hardest for a lot of people, because, when you're renting, sometimes you don't have enough to really save or put aside. And so with a lot of home ownership programs, what they have done is actually, try to make it more affordable for people by giving help when it came to down payments.
Yes. So for one, we're talking about building wealth in families. But something else you brought to my attention when we were talking earlier, and it had to do with homestead protection in estates after someone passes on. Can you explain that to
us? Yes. And I in addition to my civilian work as an attorney, I was also an Army JAG officer, an Army lawyer. And so a lot of what we did as an Army reservist is that we would prepare people who were getting ready to mobilize or get deployed. And so as part of that mobilization exercise, we would prepare wills for people. And so one thing that we always, counsel people on is that if they own property, to make sure that they did a will. Because if you own property, when you do a will and you designate who you want that property to go to in the will, then that property would, pass directly to whoever who you designate to be your heir for that property. So you wouldn't have any issues, with, transferring the property, from one generation to another. And so that's one thing that we're always advised. And sometimes with younger soldiers, they didn't own any property, it wasn't as important, but to a lot of our, older, soldiers or married soldiers who own property and have families, we always told them, to make sure that they had a will. And one of the things is that, especially in Florida, is that, once you own a home or you have property, you need to make sure that you sign up for your homestead exemption, your homestead rights, because with the homestead exemption, I mean, most times people think of it because before the homestead exemption allowed the first $50,000 of your property to be tax free, and I believe there's an increase in that. I think it went from like $50,000 to $75,000. But with that homestead exemption, it also protected the survivors, once someone had passed. So if you're a survivor and you became the owner, of that property, it protected you from creditors. And so with the homestead exemption, that's why it's important. Because sometimes people didn't always always, didn't really think about it,
Yes.
because it's something that is not automatic. I mean, you have to go and apply for it and
Yes, you
request
do. Yes,
that
you
homestead
do.
exemption. And so it not only protects, your the amount of taxes that you would have to pay, but it also protects, the survivors, if you were to pass.
So, given an example, I have a property and I have children, and I claim a homestead exemption, and that exempts me from paying higher taxes. Without that exemption amount, it makes that property protected from certain creditors. And so if I pass on, that home, which is now an asset, is treated with the same protections, that's what you're saying, as if I were still in the home for those children.
Well,
because it's homestead, they're not subject to it being taken by creditors, or it's not taxed as it is regular property.
Right. Well, and it mainly protects the surviving spouse, because what happens is that, when you have a 2-income family, or, even one income, but with one, owner, one spouse, dies or predeceases the other, then it really protects the surviving spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that surviving spouse is that while that there's a homestead exemption, on that property, the surviving spouse will continue to receive that protection.
Right.
But also, receive almost like an additional protection, from any type of, creditors or, anything like that. Because, usually, and that's why one of the reasons I always told people to do a will if you own property is that once you do a will, whoever you designate that property to, it goes directly to that person. And so if you were to, to go through probate, you have a will, the creditors, there's nothing for the creditors, there's nothing for them to come after, because everything has already gone through, passed directly to the heir.
That's right.
And so that's, and most times people don't like to think about doing wills. That's, especially in our community, it's like the last thing, we talk about, but it's, it's important that we do a will, just so that, because, you want to protect, your property, you want to be able to protect your family, from creditors, because otherwise what happens is that if you don't do a will, then you end up waiting until the statute of limitations run before you actually probate it, because otherwise creditors will come after. And, and it's, especially, sometimes if someone incur a lot of medical expenses, before, prior to their death, a lot of the hospitals or a lot of the medical providers will, come after that property. Mm-hmm. And so that's why, it's important to seek that homestead exemption, but also to do a will.
Yes.
So that way that property passes to whoever you want to, without it having to, basically be in the pot that the creditors can go after, after death, before, if it gets probated.
Yes. So I heard you mention your military service, and I think that this is interesting for our listeners to know that you served in the Judge Advocates Corps when you were deployed to the Afghanistan theater, and also you were in charge of the military courts while there. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am. And in 2008, I served in Afghanistan for a year, and I was a judge advocate, Army lawyer.
Well, we know that especially when we have African Americans who achieve to such high levels of in any field, and you in the military and also in your private practice, and also when you were serving here in the county court system, it's a wealth of experience, and I would just like to say that I'm honored to know that we've had you representing us in these various and they're diverse fields of law, and doing your job so exceptionally. I just want to mention that for our listeners, that Attorney Johnson is also the recipient of the Bronze Star Medal Award. And also, he's a recipient of the Legion of Merit Award, awarded after his 27 plus years of service as a U.S. Army veteran. So again, we thank you for your service, and we also commend you for your continued focus on fairness and the law. Now, you are running with all of that experience. I mean, you've run courts. You have run courts. We're not saying just participating in courts. You have run courts. You have established court systems in foreign countries, in war zones. You've practiced at entry level and moved up to assistant state attorney and at the Attorney General's office, and then now in your private practice. Why do you think that background helps you as you run for the upcoming election, this is August 28th, am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
For the Circuit Court Judge for Group 25.
And, one of the things that I, as I've been going around, I kind of, when you're in the military and you're kind of moving along, you don't always think about it. But now I'm on the tail end of it. I mean, I served in Iraq in 91. I served in Bosnia in 97. And I served in Afghanistan in 2008. And usually when I share that, it's not because anything that I've done that was good, but it's just that God has really protected me,
yes,
over the years, and really protected my mind. And so I just kind of felt like, with that, background and that experience, God has better prepared me, and it is like I'm running, for a circuit court judge with a purpose,
yes,
not just to kind of get my name in the paper or anything like that, but to really, to get out there and make a difference. And as a candidate for circuit court judge, I'm the only candidate in Group 25 to have worked litigated cases in all 5 divisions of the circuit court, which includes family law, probate cases, juvenile cases, felony criminal cases, and also civil cases over 15,000. And then I'm also the only candidate in Group 25 to have litigated cases, jury trials to verdict in both civil and criminal cases, but also as a prosecutor and as a criminal defense attorney. And so for me, I think it's important, to have some balance. And so that's when I kind of talk about fairness.
Yes.
It's because I've actually seen it from both sides, and know how important it is that when people come to court, that they have their day, and that they have their opportunity to be heard. And so, with that, and that's why, I've been running for circuit court judge, not just to make a difference, but to literally be the difference.
Yes, amen, amen. Well, I hope that our listeners have gotten more information about the private ownership part of home ownership, and some of the protections afforded, and also the opportunities when home ownership is the path that we choose to do as stewards of the blessings that God has given us. We would like to thank again our guest, Attorney Henry Quinn Johnson, who's an attorney with the Albertelli Law Firm and also a candidate for Circuit Court Judge in Group 25. Thank you again, Attorney Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And I guess just one thing I wanted to add, if I could, is that with the for veterans, when they talk about home ownership, there's a veterans administration's loans that veterans could get that helps with home ownership.
Yes.
And so, which sometimes it exempts veterans from having to pay that mortgage insurance that could increase, mortgage payments. So if someone is a veteran, they should, consider pursuing a Veterans Administration home loan.
Public Square would like to thank our guests, Attorney Maxine Cheesman and Attorney Henry Quinn Johnson, for that wonderful information that they shared with our listeners today about our rights as tenants, landlords, and the benefits of home ownership. Public Square would also like to thank Dr. Angela Shuttlesworth for being one of our guest interviewers today. This has been TMBC Public Square. Have a glorious week.
My brothers and sisters, we are living in a time that seems to be so oriented to self. It seems to be focused on me, myself, and I. And unfortunately, a lot of this attitude seems to stem from the highest levels of government, particularly from our president, where the focus seems to be solely on the individual. I want to talk about giving today. There are a couple passages of Scripture that I want to find my footing in, and I hope that you will listen carefully and you might internalize what the Word says. In Acts at the 20th chapter, and I'm reading from the Revised Standard Version of the Sacred Writ, Acts 20 and the 35th verse, we find the following. In all things I've shown you that by so toiling one must help the weak, remembering the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And it's the same author, probably Paul, in 1 Corinthians 16:2, and I'm reading from the Living Translation Bible. And this is what it says. On every Lord's day, each of you should put something aside from what you have earned during the week and use it for this offering. The amount depends on how much the Lord has given or has helped you to earn. One of the most difficult challenges for all of us is to develop an attitude where we can share what the Lord has blessed us with. Usually we focus on money, but it's more than money. It's our time, it's our talents, it's our concern, it's our love. It's reaching outside of ourselves to touch someone else. Jesus was quite clear in showing us the way. He always had time for the other. He always was seeking ways to meet people where their needs were and then to try to help them, and not just walk on by. That was the whole story of the Good Samaritan parable, how Jesus used that as an example to show that we are required to try to help a brother or sister that may be struggling, particularly those of us that have been blessed in an abundant way. And even if it hasn't been abundant in your own thinking, we always have more than someone else. There's a story that was told of a couple, a man and a woman. They gave a very large donation to their church. And the reason that they said they were giving this such a large donation, I don't know what the exact amount was, but it was a large amount. They gave it in memory of their son. Now, their son had lost his life in World War II, and they were wanting to memorialize his service. And so it was a generous donation. When the donation was announced by the pastor to the congregation, there was another couple sitting in the audience. And the woman who heard the announcement, she quietly said to her husband, let's give the same amount, the same large donation in honor of each of our boys. The husband, upon hearing this, replied, what are you talking about? He said that neither one of our sons was killed in the war. Our sons went to the war, but they came back alive. And the woman said something profound. Exactly. Our sons made it back alive, and we ought to be grateful. And this is a way that we can express our gratitude to God for sparing our lives. I think that's a wonderful parable, wonderful example. Oftentimes our giving is because God has given to us. Oftentimes our giving is because maybe somebody has blessed us with a kindness. Maybe there's something that resides deep within our memory, our sacred memory, that would cause us to rejoice. And we ought to show some sign of that. Not hold on to what we have, but bless someone as the Lord has indeed blessed us. The one couple were giving in memory of their son who unfortunately lost his life in the war. But the second couple, based on that woman's astute and wise observation, they gave because of gratitude. They gave because out of their rejoicing, God had blessed them by allowing their sons to return home. And so she wanted to show an expression to God, a tangible expression. And isn't that the way it is, my sisters and brothers? That many times we can show our true love to God by tangibly giving of our treasures and our time and our talent. Well, all of our charitable giving in life produces at least 3 benefits, and I think this is important. One, when we give charitably, it helps someone who may be in need. When we give, we help someone. Number 2, it can inspire others to give. And that's one of the reasons I, at Tabernacle, asked the tithers to stand, not as a show of braggadocio, but as a way to let other people see the blessings. When the tithers stand up, and when people make that personal declaration, it can possibly and hopefully inspire others to give. When we see people who are being blessed, and even people who we may not think are being blessed, they still bless God through their giving. That can be a great source of inspiration. It can go viral. It can catch on, and others can catch the vision. And then lastly, and I think more importantly, when we give, it builds character within us. Selflessness, generosity, and compassion. And in this present environment where we find ourselves living, where we're so polarized, and it appears that everything is about attacking, and on social media we see all the horrendous and horrible things that are being bandied about left and right. We don't have enough selflessness because it's always about me. What can I do? We don't certainly have enough generosity. And we lack those things, I would submit, my brothers and sisters, because we don't have enough compassion. Again, Jesus serves as the model for each and every one of us, for he showed a life of dedicated compassion, a life that reached outside of himself, and I would dare say outside of his comfort zone, to touch somebody who may have been in need. That's what compassion is about. Cold passion, cold warm feelings, cold excitement about somebody's predicament, where we are moved, not out of pity, not out of sympathy, because that puts distance, but out of empathy, where we put our own selves in the predicament that we might see someone else in, and we identify with it. And so we are moved to engage in that compassion, and that will generate the willingness to give. And I say it builds character in us. We must keep in mind, my brothers and sisters, that when you give, not only are you ultimately helping people, even when you give it to the church, even when you give it to another institution or organization, these organizations are comprised of people, and we're helping people through our giving. We're able to do ministry. We're able to reach out and help somebody. Then we, in our individual capacities, we can bless someone, that person on the street that we might think is just a beggar. But by God's grace, there go you and I. We could be in a similar predicament. You know, someone has said many of us are only one are 2 paychecks away from being possibly homeless or in a bad situation. And so we ought not look down our noses on those individuals who are struggling and scuffling. To be sure, there may be some con men and women out there, but that's not our call. Our call is to be compassionate and to love through our giving. Your giving will bring not only sunshine into the lives of other people, but when we give, it brings a certain joy into our own life. Oh, friends, what would happen if all of us in this culture, in this church, or wherever you are, were to decide to have an attitude of gratitude was such that it would encourage and inspire us to give until it hurts, as someone has said. I'm convinced when you bless someone, the Lord will make a way to take care of you. And then there is a passage in Luke 16, 10, 11 that really kind of sums up a different attitude that many of us ought to focus on. Why we may not be blessed the way we think. Here's what Luke says. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? This is what Jesus is trying to help us to see. That God looks deep within our hearts. If we've been blessed with material wealth, if we've been blessed with a modicum of success, and we hold on to it and we squeeze it, and we don't cast our bread upon the water so that it will be returned back to us 2, 3, 4-fold, we totally miss the boat. If we're not generous with the bounty that God has given us, how can we expect God to continue to bless us and to bless us more abundantly? I would hope that we would focus more and more, all of us in this culture, this society, in our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, wherever we are, to realize that when you help somebody, you build up the culture, you build up the society. And then as those of us that have Sunday worship, that passage in Corinthians, and that's what I want to close out on. That passage in Corinthians has really profound meaning. Let me read it again. And again, it's from the Living Bible, 1 Corinthians 16:2. On every Lord's Day, not on some, but on every Lord's Day, each of you should put aside something from what you have earned during the week, or I would add what you may have been given, and use it for this offering. The amount depends on how much the Lord has helped you to earn. And remember, God loves a cheerful giver. Some of us give grudgingly, but that's not the spirit. When we are generous, we cultivate a certain persona that people can see the love of Christ coming through us, through our generosity. Jesus gave of his total self to men and women, boys and girls, to those who are on the margins of society. And even if you don't have a lot of money, you have time. You have talent. You can give your time and your talent to the Lord, to the church, to people who are in need. And that's what we must be about. As we truly work on bringing the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. As we truly strive to become the beloved community that Jesus talks about, that God will bless us. When we show love not only towards our brothers and sisters within our own faith community, but when we reach outside and we bless those who are in need, when we look for ways to be of help, and that's why I dare say voting is important. You're helping someone through the political process. We cannot be oblivious to what goes around us. We must be concerned about our neighbor. Yes, I dare say we are our brothers and sisters' keepers. And so whatever God has blessed you with as we come through the week, set aside a portion to bless the Lord. When you bless God, I can tell you, I can testify, the Lord will bless you. He'll make a way out of no way. He will take care of you. My prayer is that God keep you safe and sound.
This has been Hope from the Hill, brought to you by the ministries of Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, serving its congregation and the community for over 120 years. We're located on the Hill at 801 8th Street in West Palm Beach, Florida, 33401. We start our weeks on Sunday morning at 7 a.m. with a free fellowship breakfast on the first, second, third, and fifth Sunday mornings, and on Saturday before the fourth Sunday. Sunday school starts at 8:30 a.m. and worship service begins at 9:45 a.m. On Tuesday evenings, we have Bible study from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And on Wednesday evenings, we have prayer and praise service from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. If you are without a church home, we hope that you would prayerfully consider joining Tabernacle. Reverend Kisner would love to be your pastor, and we would love to have you in our family of faith. For more information, call 561-832-8338 or visit us on the web at www.tmbc1893.org. Remember, keep your eyes to the hill, from which cometh your help, for your help comes from the Lord.